Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Stone Genius Podcast. My name's Ro. You know me as the Stone Genius. You know me, I'm often stoned. I'm always a genius. You know, it seems like I just don't do solo shows anymore. And guess what? Not a solo show this time either. No. So good for you all listening. We have a special guest on today. This guest is joining us remotely. His name is Joe Masterleo. He is a clinical psychotherapist and clinical social worker. He is also the author of The Ambient Christ, The Untold Story of God in Science, Scripture, and Spirituality. Welcome to the program, Joe.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm glad that you're on the program. This is a topic that I like to talk about, things that so many times growing up, I have found a disconnect between science and religion. And I never thought that was the case. And so when I saw your book, read the background, and read up on you, I was really excited about that. Tell us a little bit about your history, your religious history that kind of led to this point, and then a little bit about the book. What led to the point of the book?
I think I'll begin with the fact that I had been an experienced clinician for a number of years before I had before I activated my spiritual dimension, let's put it that way. I've been in the mental health care field, working in clinical settings in hospitals, and then for 15 years, and then in private practice for another 25 or 30 or more. I've lost count. But somewhere along the way in my early 30s, I'm now in my mid 70s, I did pick up the subject of, had an interest in spirituality, primarily because the focus of my discipline is the interior life.
And what is that? What does that mean? The interior life?
Well, one's psychological makeup, their psychological development, and their capacity to do relationships in a healthy way.
Okay.
It starts with how a person is wired inside and what their strengths and weaknesses are, and so on and so forth. But I understood that there are basically two parts to the interior life, and the non-biological parts is one's psyche or one's personality. The religious word for psyche or personality is soul. And then one's spirit, or, the spiritual aspect of a person. And so I took an interest in my early 30s as to the nature of that. I have been raised, my formal religion as a youngster was in the Catholic tradition. I attended church for a number of years and got my religious training and orientation along those lines. And somewhere along the line, and during college and beyond, I dropped that. It didn't seem to have any relevance or meaning to me, except as a religious orientation that I was raised in, and in terms of ritual and ceremony, which didn't have a lot of meaning to me at that time. So a little later on in life, I began to explore that, whether that was a reality or not, or an experience that I've heard other people talk about. I was intrigued by some friends I hadn't run into in a number of years who talked about their newfound faith and their religious conversion.
And was that to Catholicism, Christianity, to another faith?
Well, what I was impressed by that I'd never heard before. I mean, I didn't know the scriptures very well. I didn't know them really at all. Just have an intelligent conversation about them. And they were Christians. They were more along in the Protestant tradition. Though I wasn't aware of it at the time, I became aware of it later. They were of fundamentalist orientation, but they had the ABCs down. And so I had a number of, in terms of what the scriptures said about activating and accessing divinity, at least by way of Christ, because that was there. So we had a number of I had a number of conversations with him, and being an interviewer myself, um, in my own practice, and evaluating what I hear,
Right.
I began to press them up to some, very pointed questions, and they seemed to have answers, and they used the scriptures as references in ways that I was impressed by their knowledge of same, but more impressed by their experience, which I understood and believed they were experiencing, but I couldn't relate to it. I didn't know. They struck me as people who were alive to something in ways inside themselves that they hadn't been before they had this encounter or experience that was foreign to me. And it seemed to make sense.
Was it appealing to you at that time? Did you see it and it's foreign to you, but was it appealing or just different / exotic and so worth further investigation?
Yeah, I was more intrigued the more I spoke with them. In fact, my mindset was, though it was open, that perhaps they joined a cult, and they might have been alone and needed a belonging system to relate to, and church and religion and their particular brand of it kind of did it for them.
Right.
But I thought that I would ask the kind of pointed questions that would get to the bottom of whether there was any merit to what they're saying, at least on the surface. And there seemed to be. I didn't.
What was there, at least to this point that we're talking about, what was their most convincing? Was it their ability to tie scripture into their delivery of their message to you? Was it the change in them as a person? What did you see?
It was primarily the change in them as persons. Several of these people I had known in my history. I went to school with a couple of them, high school. We played sports together, so I was familiar with the kind of people. We used to party together when we were in college, so I was familiar with the kind of people they were. How they thought and what their demeanor was. What I was most impressed by was they were different. There was something different about what they were radiating that made me curious and seemed to resonate with something inside of me that, in retrospect, I think I was looking for.
So
but I wasn't biting. I didn't bite right away.
Okay, that was going to be the follow-up. Then what was the next thing? So one of the things, I have always said that I would be a tremendous cult leader. I'm just too lazy to actually start one. So the one that we're worried about is our oldest, Mo, and she even got me a T-shirt that has the Kool-Aid guy on the front of it, and it says, "Let's start a cult." So so I'm always worried about... So here's my background. I grew up with my grandfather on my mom's side. He was a Christian, first Christian minister, pastor. My grandmother was the organist. My dad, when I was born, was the business administrator at First Christian of Tampa. My mom was the youth director there. So it was all in the family. And then on my dad's side, my dad's father, my grandfather on his side, he was, I guess, a lay minister. So I don't think he had, I think that's what they call it. See, and this is where it's weird for me because I spent so much time in the church and I can spit out verses or whatever, but it's sometimes I'm like, hold on, is that, like someone will say a book of the Bible. I'm like, that's really a book of the Bible. Like, I feel like that I'm can be all over the place, but that's how I grew up. And so I always say that I'm a Christian, that I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Holy Spirit. I believe all of that. But if an alien lands, I'm pretty open. I mean, an alien lands because that was I'm pretty open. So, which has set me apart and different than many in my family. My mom, who I still see, I went to church with her this morning. I will curse with the best of them. I used to run our church golf league here, which was about 80 players at peak. And so new people would be caught off guard at my colorful vocabulary on the golf course. And I
Mhm.
was, I was like, you know what? You don't need to judge. I'm okay with don't, no one worry about me. I'm good. I talk to God a lot. We're good. And so that's kind of where I stand. But I still tell my wife, I'll see people in a church. We'll go visit a church, maybe out of town, and go to a praise service. And even though it may be a mainline, we always try to go to a mainline, not a non-denominational. But
Mhm.
sometimes they feel culty, for lack of a better term.
Mhm.
It just has a weird feel. So that's why
Yes.
I think that it's great and
Yeah.
interesting that someone was was making it appealing, but you still had
Yeah.
this sounds a little culty.
Yeah. These were stable people of integrity that were, that were, they weren't off the deep end or anything. They're in their conversations, they were very reasoned. And the second thing that impressed me was that their faith was founded in the teachings of Scripture, which ground and orient them, to their faith and the tradition of it. Um, and not so much by way of the particular denominational stripe they were from, because they weren't from any denominational stripe, really. They belonged to an independent church. It was a Bible believing church. It didn't go by Episcopal or Catholic or
Right.
Protestant or anything like that. It was probably more out of the Protestant tradition, but they didn't use that name. So that was the second thing that impressed me. The third thing, basically, the thing that drew me to this to begin with, it was a time in my life when where I had experienced a series of losses. Um, uh, any one of which would have been, personally difficult, to work through and process. I had a relationship of long standing that we thought would lead to a marriage, but didn't, and we just went our separate ways. That was hard to take. Shortly thereafter, a parent died. My father had passed away. And then shortly after that, I had been promised, there were two psychiatrists in the Syracuse, New York area, which is where I'm from, who were two very prominent psychiatrists that had admitting privileges to the psychiatric unit I worked on. And they thought very highly of me and wanted me to work with their patients who had to be hospitalized during their stay. And they were so fond of me and impressed by my work that they had asked me to join them when I had finished. I was in graduate school at the time, when I had finished my degree and got licensed. And I almost couldn't believe that. It was a great compliment. So I was looking forward to that.
Right.
And then one of them contacted me when I was ready to go and got my certifications and said, kind of seemed to make excuses that they had changed their mind. Now, I had later found out that one of the partners really didn't want anybody else in their practice. And I think it was their own disagreement. But that was a big disappointment. Those are three disappointments in a row that they tend to tenderize your heart, and especially on the heels of losses.
Right.
You tend to think about the big questions, or one tends to think about the big questions, particularly an experience of the death of a loved one, which was the death. I mean, I've experienced death in distant relatives, but that was the first relative close to me that passed away. So naturally, one of the byproducts of that over time, makes you think about, is there an afterlife? So my heart was kind of prepared to look around.
So
And
had
go
you
ahead.
given the afterlife much thought up to that point?
No.
See, so here's me with the afterlife. And I say it all the time. If you enter a conversation with me, I've probably already had this conversation many times before with you, meaning that I know every answer you can give me. I know every response I'm going to give you to these answers. So let's go. Um, and it just, with me growing up, I was thinking as you were talking, kind of my journey and how I really, I don't want to say didn't have a choice, but I just grew up in church. I mean, I literally, like, one of the first stories of me is
Mhm.
my parents' First Christian Church of Tampa, which is no longer there, but they had a separate building. Offices were on the first floor, and then the next two floors were actually where my parents lived with me and my sister. And one of the first stories I remember is me getting lost in the church offices. They couldn't find me on any of the three floors.
Mhm.
And so, I was always in a church. I just was always around. I never felt like I even quit, like, I just was always like, oh, I'm a Christian. I mean, it was just something I was.
Mhm.
And even though I was immersed in that and I knew about the afterlife, it wasn't until, and this has been about 20 years ago, we've been going to one of the largest mainline churches in the United States. It's United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas. And we always joke that when we joined back in 1999, it was a small church of about 10,000. I think right now
Mhm.
we're like at 24,000 or something like that. And so we had joined a small group, which takes a big church like that and it makes it small. Like I used to play basketball with the guys from there. So I had a small group, kind of those guys I'd see twice a week when we play basketball. Sometimes we'd hang out or see each other. But we joined one my wife and I did.
Mhm.
And I literally, even though I was in my 40s, probably at this point, late 30s, early 40s at this point, and I thought about the afterlife, but I never gave it that much thought until someone said, the question was, what do you think heaven is going to be like? And I was
Mhm.
like, I literally had never, I guess I was just like, I don't know, I'm going to have a mansion. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to have all the Chef Boyardee I want. I don't know. I had never given it that. And it was funny because someone said, and this is what they said, that I said no and started shaking my head. And it really set me on the track of thinking about heaven, because they said, well, I imagine us being at the feet of Jesus for all eternity, singing his praises. And I
Mhm.
was like, okay, I've heard a lot of you sing inside the sanctuary. I don't need to hear you all for all of eternity, first of all. Secondly,
Mhm.
I had never thought of it like that. I was like, I just never really. And so probably the last, especially last 10 years, I have no idea. I always tell people that when they ask me my opinion what heaven's going to be like, it's going to be one of two things. It's going to be completely awesome, or it's going to be nothing. I
Okay.
figure it's going to be, because I can't, there's no way my little pea brain, no matter how smart I think I
Yeah.
am, can even imagine what it's going to be like. The best case scenario I can give for what I think heaven is going to be like is when you go outside on like a 60-degree day here in like Kansas, like in the springtime. And when you're
Mhm.
facing the sun, it feels glorious. Your body feels warm. Problem is you have to keep rotating, because whatever's not facing the sun is cold. And I tell people that, to me, heaven is going to feel like that warm
Yeah.
sun shining. I just feel, I can't explain anything else, but that's the feeling that at least I believe I'm going to have.
Well, in retrospect, what I was out, there are a number of things that came together. In retrospect, I it's become very clear to me over the years. Now, this was back in the early '80s, um, that there was this what's known as a synchronization going on between where I was in my own journey at age 33 and the things that were happening to me as I began to open myself in a curious way to asking questions that had to do with spirituality. It included the afterlife, but the thing that intrigued me most, there were just a number of people that I began to run into, and I'm not really spiritualizing this. It happened more than just the number of people I ran, sheer number of people that I ran into with the faith perspective was more than one would ordinarily expect just by running into them by coincidence.
So was this after you kind of had your awareness?
No,
Okay. So it
this was this
leading up
was
to it.
as in retrospect, it was I saw it as and felt it as, or at least it made me think. I'm, I mean, it was one person right after another, right after another. Co-workers. I remember when I rented my first office building in the downtown area. Um, I was shown an office that I eventually signed a lease for. And I noticed the elevator operator had a Bible next to her, and turned out the building owner did. And I said, geez, are you one of these believers too? And then the maintenance man came up to put my air conditioning system right. And are you one of these believers? And they would take a few minutes in a non-pushy way to I'm thinking to myself, I feel like I'm surrounded here. What's going on?
So did you find, because in this instance, you're saying, are you one of those believers? But did you have many of them approaching you, or maybe not even approaching you,
No.
but making it aware enough, like, I got a Bible, are you going to ask me about, or no, they did.
No, they weren't pushy. In fact, most of them were from the same church.
So
if you could believe that.
I had mentioned that with our church golf league. I knew that it's very, I can talk about anything tell me to go strike up a conversation with someone about something, I'll do it. I have no problem doing that. I know that most people are not like that at all. Mm-hmm. And I have no problem talking about my faith. I have no problem talking about golf. And so when we started our golf league, our Church of the Resurrection, is known by COR, C-O-R. And so I said that we were going to do golf shirts because, and here in Kansas City, we have the Chiefs and the Royals. So we go, you can pick Royal Blue or you can pick Chiefs Red. And then it's going to say COR Golf League. And then it's going to have your name, just your first name. And people are like, oh, that's cool. And I go, but I want you to wear these. I go, there's two other times I want you to wear these than just golf league. I want you to wear them at golf league because everyone forgets everyone's name. It's so big. You may not play with the same person twice in the league. So wear them. That way you can keep someone's name. I go, I want you to wear them to church. Our church is so big that way, oh, the royal blue shirt or the red shirt. And then, oh yeah, golf, and just go. Mm-hmm. So it shrinks our church down. And I go, third of all, I want you to wear it anytime you fucking feel like it. Because I want you to, because if you're standing in line at Chipotle and someone's a golfer, they may look at that and go, what's COR Golf League? You didn't have to start that. Oh, I go to Church of the Resurrection and I play in our golf league. Even if you leave it at that, let them ask the follow-up question. And then they're like, your church has a golf league? It's amazing how often, and then you would get, and then, oh yeah, you don't have to be a member to come play in our church golf league, and how many people would come and play and then start. So I know it's not easy for people to always ask. So in a long way, do you think it was beneficial that you approached the people, that you were proactive about? Are you one of these, not Bible beaters, but, one of these religious types? Do you think that benefited you? Do you think that you would have eventually got to where you are? It just would have taken longer, but you being proactive, do you think that expedited the process?
Well, yeah, I ran into a couple people that were a little pressured in their speech. Some people get on a roll, and it was more that they were very excited about wanting to share with me, but kind of overdid it.
Right.
And I would have to, respectfully have them back off. But most of them, were receptive to my questions, and, were able to spend as much time with me as I had asked questions, and just obliged, gave their inputs and so on, and shared what they wanted to without being over-inclusive or excessive. So I was impressed by that. They respected but they were boundaried, and they respected my boundaries. They weren't proselytizing or anything. They were just factually answering my inquiries.
Do you remember what your initial inquiries were, and maybe how that changed over whatever period of time? Like,
yeah, you see, what it did was, I've always been a self-starter when I've been interested in something. In fact, when I worked at Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse, it was a teaching hospital. Had a number of resources in it where you could learn, whatever part of healthcare you were in. And they had a great library there, and I would use it and read on clinical things, and read so much in my spare time that I probably knew more than I had worked for 7 years before I went back to graduate school in a clinical setting. So when I went back to get my certification, my degree, I probably knew more than most of my professors because I've worked on the firing lines in a teaching hospital. I learned from all the senior people, absorbed as much as I could. And so I approached this topic the same way. I wanted to know if what I was hearing was real, and if it's something. The thing that intrigued me the most that impressed me the most about people who were sharing with me is that it was an experience here and now. It wasn't a pie in the sky afterlife type of thing that people had hoped that they would experience someday upon dying as a precondition. That they had talked about being filled with the Spirit, having a spiritual awakening, being filled with the Holy Spirit. And I understood it. I believed it because they were credible, but I didn't know where they were. I felt they were somewhere else other than where I was in my consciousness, still engaged with me, but somewhere else.
Did you ever find a weird disconnect with the fact that I want to believe as much as they do or feel that, but you weren't at that level?
Well, I wanted to know first of all, I wanted to know if Jesus was who he said he was. I didn't know that. I mean, I heard that, I read about it, but I didn't know. I had no way of knowing other than the historical record. I wanted to know that, first of all, based on the evidence. So I did a lot of reading on my own. I went to bookstores and bought books on how. I didn't know the Bible from Adam, So I bought as many books on how to study the Bible as I could. And basically I took 2 years, not every day, but whereas I might go out and party one evening on a weekend, I stayed home and read and partied the other night. But I wanted to learn, what does this book say? What does it mean by what it says? Because it's ancient. And how does it apply to me in the 20th century?
Right.
Okay. And is it can it be an experience, an explainable? Is it possible to experience eternity in the field of time? Okay. Which I subsequently find out you could, because they intersect, and we'll talk about that later. Because clearly that's where these people were. Okay.
Right.
Clearly that's where they were. And sensibly so, not that they would wear it on their sleeve, because people think you're crazy if you do that, without being invited.
Do you remember an instance where it sounds like it's the one step forward, one step forward. Did you ever have someone that you ran into that was a 2-step back? Like, okay, let me pump the brakes here for a second. Maybe, because a lot of the things that I hear from others, or when you hear about Christianity, the thing that turns most people off about Christianity is Christians. And
oh, absolutely. I understand that.
yeah. And I get that. So like one of the things that like I say, I don't judge me if you want, but I'm not worried about anyone else's judging me. I had someone once as a business, it was a business dealing, and this person was not having a good day. And then they got locked out of their car. So I had to spend time out of my day. I drove them to a locksmith. So, I don't remember any of the day, honestly. I know that I spent half the day with this person, but at the end of the day, when they were leaving, they offered me money. I go, I don't need money. I go, you needed help today. I just helped you out. And they go, you're a Christian, aren't you? I was like, yeah. And they go, you can tell. And I mean, and that means more to me than, people that see my potty mouth or how I may address certain things or whatever like that. But like my wife, sometimes I will have very vivid conversations, colorful conversations with Jesus or God. And my wife, and we've been together 28 years, she used to say, sometimes I get worried about the way you talk to God. And I go, don't ever worry about the way I talk to God. You need to be worried if you hear me not talking to God. Right. I go, because at least I'm still having a conversation. And for every negative thing, she's generally hearing the negative things. But I am always praying throughout the day. I mean, and like I say, whether I feel better, and if that's something putting me at ease, whatever. I don't care, but
Yeah.
I say little. I mean, it's funny because where I have had a part-time job as I do this gig, the owner's wife there, she's very religious. And so on beautiful days, I know that she's my hype man because I'll walk in, I'll be like, this is a day the Lord has made. And I know that she's going to respond with, let
Yeah.
us rejoice and be glad in it. And I know that every time I say it, so I enjoy that too, because I have someone that both makes us smile. It makes
Yeah.
us have a good day. And so I love being a Christian, and I apologize to the people that see me at my worst times and don't.
Hmm.
But here's the good news. If you see me at my worst times and you're like, oh, you can still be a Christian and be at those worst times. That's the cool thing about being a Christian.
Oh, sure.
You can bounce back, or at least that's what I
Well,
hear.
yeah, after basically on and off 2 years of turning over every stone, being an educated person and evidence-based as a as a therapist, when you evaluate people and diagnose them, you do it based on the evidence. You have to have evidence for, the evaluation you come up with, and which determines your treatment plan.
Right.
So I was used to gathering evidence. Like I said, I took almost 2 years, and I was convinced in my head that he was who he said, gathering everything I could read in the scriptures and other historical data from those times. And not really, knowing anything about scripture, or Christ. I was convinced that it was more likely than not that he was who he said he was. I was convinced of that.
During this 2 years, did you have almost like a mentor, or did you have a small group that you went back to and talked to?
I had a couple of coworkers who, two of whom showed up at my dad's wake and were very encouraging and supportive with my family, and extended themselves. I subsequently found out both of them, were people of Christian faith, although they didn't advertise that. Their demeanor said they were caring people. And we got to talking, going to lunch, and they were, much more mature and further along in their faith. So we had conversations, and I would ask them questions. I went to church with them a couple times. We went to breakfast afterwards and had conversations. So yeah, I surrounded myself with resources enough to be informative, and to make me consider the validity of who Christ was. Because remember now, my goal was to find out, was he who he said he was?
So one of the
Can you
interesting,
experience God's presence as an experience in the here and now? Can you be awakened to that? Because I knew that people were, but I wasn't.
right?
And so after I had all this knowledge, and understanding the nature of divinity from a theological standpoint in my head, from what I read, I began to understand that from what I understand of God, God is seamlessly co-present with creation. They're indivisible. I mean, God is separate from creation, or God is distinct from creation, but not separate from it.
Okay.
Okay. They're seamlessly, God is not creation, but creation embeds in God, and God incarnates or embeds in creation. I believe that as a concept, but I didn't experience that. So I had this sense that God was closer to me than my own nose, probably. And so I didn't have to pray to something as if it was far away. That probably the reason I couldn't see or experience inwardly that presence is because it's like your own nose. You can't see it unless you look in a mirror or it'll cross your eyes.
Right.
But it's right in front of you. So I assumed that, and I would have these private conversations. I'd say, it's probably why I don't know you, because you're everywhere. You're probably closer to me than my own skin from what I've read. But my prayer was, but I don't experience that. I still don't experience that. I was a little frustrated by that. But it did lead up to a time um, when, much to my surprise, I did have a breakthrough, and it became an experience, and you could have knocked me over. I mean, I mean, there's no words to describe it. And it wasn't suggestion or because I was around other people that talked to me about their own experience. It happened to me as it happens to everybody that has a spiritual awakening. It just happened to be very powerful. It caught me by surprise. Um, and it basically,
at that point,
basically all I could do was involuntarily cry for almost several hours at a time. I mean, it, it was not like anything on this earth that I ever experienced. Let me put it that way, in ways that made it unmistakable. That what I was looking for 2 years and asked so many questions about, and was even angry and frustrated about with God because I couldn't access it, was given to me. And then I was sort of beside myself. In fact, it was so radically different than ordinary consciousness that being in this profession and working in inpatient services and having experienced a number of losses that involved sadness and which bordered on depression and along more mild lines, I didn't know if I was having a acute psychotic episode, a manic episode.
right.
Okay. I mean, I knew I wasn't but the reality I was experiencing was so very, very powerfully uplifting.
So where were you, or what were you doing?
I was alone. I was alone. I was single at the time. I was alone in my apartment, and I remember feeling more despondent than ever because a number of months had passed from those serial losses, and they were really beginning to set in.
Right.
And I felt their serial impact, and I was pretty low. And I was just in a place where in great earnest, I would say it was almost, I mean, I wasn't desperate, but I would say it was a desperate, I wasn't desperate in terms of being suicidal, or it was a desperate plea. If the distinct words were, I've heard so much about you all these years, and if you're real, could you please make yourself real to me? And I couldn't, it was as if I was asking for a glass of water after not having had anything to drink for weeks, or something to eat. I mean, it was that figural in my consciousness.
So was there a delay? Was it almost instantaneous?
No. No. I remember I had gone, I had taken a shower that morning, and I had wanted to sit down afterwards. And actually, I was too down to even read the word. I just sat in that chair and just sort of sighed, looked out the window, and I said those words. And it was as if the only way I can describe it is I felt like I felt like I was going to literally be lifted from the chair I was sitting in. Although, I had something had taken me up, and it felt like the only way I could describe it is that I was overcome with waves, like I was overcome with waves of liquid love. I had never, obviously I had known what love was. I came from a loving family. I had been loved by other people, but not like this. I mean, this was
Did you identify it at first? And I know that may sound like a dumb question, but my wife and I, when we went to California many years ago, we were in Palm Springs, and we stand there, and then all of a sudden the whole earth starts shaking beneath our feet. 20 or 30 seconds. When it gets done, we look at each other and we're like, I wonder what that was. Like, it literally could have been anything other than an earthquake. And so
Right.
it's like, we knew what was happening, but our minds literally couldn't process what was going on around, because we were
Right.
kind of out in the open. It wasn't, I know that stores and stuff at that time, they lost their shelving, and it caused havoc, but we were like out in the middle of a field or something. So we were just
Right.
like, what's going on? But we saw
Mm.
everyone else doing the same dance as we were at the same time. But it took a bit for us to literally process what we knew exactly just happened to us, but for us to actually come to grips with, oh, okay, that just,
Right.
did it take you time while you're
Yeah.
in the middle of
Well, I
this?
can tell you this. For some reason, and this is different with everybody, conversion experiences come in all sizes, shapes, and varieties. There's no two that are alike. For some reason, I was given a powerful dose of a spiritual infilling. It was like drinking from a fire hose. I mean, really, it was so overwhelming that I'm still, although I'm still processing it. Part of the reason I wrote the book, is a part of processing. It's something I believe I was called to do
Right.
eventually. I mean, in retrospect, my work became supercharged, more energized, more insightful, um, more powerful in ways that for people who came to me asking for this, I clearly understood and began to integrate the two interior aspects of reality from a practical and theoretical standpoint. That that we're psycho-spiritual beings. In fact, I've come to conclude at this ripe old age that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience when we're so awakened. We're spiritual beings having a human experience for an extended period of time here. We come from there, I believe, and we go back to it. Some people are more aware of that actively than others, but I think that's who we are. That's who we are. And I was able to, I guess my own prayer and seeking was answered, that over the years, I became very proficient in delineating psyche from spirit and seeing their interrelationship. So people who had difficulties in living that also had a faith dimension wanted a therapist who understood that perspective, because secular therapists tend to, who don't have an active spiritual dimension in any way, tend to pathologize people of faith as, having wishful thinking, and they really need to get more practical and talk about things only in psychological terms. So my horizons were broadened, and over the years, and this is what leads up to my book, I understood that ordinary consciousness involves the kind of, it's known as dualistic thinking or separation consciousness, meaning there's a tendency to naturally think outside of having a higher awareness in terms of categories. Like, for example, you think you go to school and you take biology and you take math and you take chemistry and you take physics, and but none of those things exist separately in the real world. Okay, they all interdigitate, they all converge as a whole, but they break them up in subjects so that you can isolate them and learn the particular subject. But the whole picture of creation is entangled, that's a term that physics uses, or is one. Everything is connected to everything else. And when you have a spiritual consciousness, it dissolves dualistic thinking, and you're able to see more all-inclusively in the created order, and you're able to, you're able to be more tolerant. You're able to understand things better. Things that seem separate come together like pieces of a puzzle. And I can only speak from my experience, because the way I believe I was gifted was that having somewhat of a science background and a psychology background, so to speak, a clinical background, you add the spiritual dimension, and all the things that I had learned were coming together, and it was happening by itself. They were coming together and forming an integrated picture in my mind over the years very slowly. For example, I didn't know when I became a believer. I was a brand new believer, but I didn't know, based on my clinical experience, how that fit. Was I being called away from that? Is this something entirely different? Do they belong together? How do they belong together? And all of that was answered for me as I grew and matured over the years in learning the ABCs of my newfound faith. I saw that a number of different things were coming together. They were thought of as separate, but they're not separate. They all run together, and every discipline is a portal in some way to the invisible world or the invisible dimension where that particular discipline has its roots.
So I warned you about this earlier before we started
Okay.
recording the compound question. So I'm going to ask you probably a compound question here. So when you had this epiphany in yourself, did
Right.
others that were
They
familiar?
thought I was crazy.
They did. So even the people that you had talked to about.
Most of the friends that I had, the first thing you want to do, like for example, this is the only analogy I have. I felt like I had won the biggest lottery that one could ever win. And so it was more money than I could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. So I wanted to give it away.
Right.
I called my family members, I called my friends, silence. Some of them thought I was doing drugs. Some of them said, Joe, you've been through a hard time. You're probably, a little off your rocker. I began to realize you have to be careful with this.
Right.
Okay. You just can't share this with everybody,
Did you find a big champion or and this was going to be the other part of the compound question, I guess I never finished with, is did you find like a mentor? Did you find like a small group or a church, or did you continue this journey on yourself, or did you find the need to bring others in?
Yeah, the first rule of thumb is when you have a spiritual awakening is you have to get grounded, because you're sort of a babe in spiritual awareness. And all you know is that you are. And I understood the term, because it is a second birth. I mean, it's the only way I can put it. I felt like I was a kid again. I really did. I mean, I had an enthusiasm and an excitement.
Did it give you that aha moment where you're like, oh, okay, I understand this person better now, that maybe I question their faith or their vibrancy in their faith?
The people I called were the people who had shared their faith with me and said that they had experienced this infilling, and they understood exactly where I was. Now I felt like I was in the same wavelength they were.
Right.
Okay. I felt more at one with them than ever, because the spirit in them resonated with the same spirit that was alive in me, and sort of bore witness to them and them to me. There was this,
did it
I was
give
able
you
to relate to where they were coming from. It's as if, they all spoke Spanish, and all of a sudden I could speak Spanish, and now we could connect better because we could speak the same language.
Did you get a calming feeling after this, or did you ever get a nervous feeling like, oh crap, I don't want this to go away? Because there are times that, and I've said about, we'll be at church or a church or something, and I'll be like, man, I wish I'll be watching someone singing a praise song or something. I'm just like, man, I wish I could. I see them and I'm like, I wish I just had that energy in I mean, this song is not, I'm not singing the song. This song is being forced out of my body. And I see that. I'm like, I don't get that. But once again, I don't judge my own personal faith journey I don't measure it against someone else's. So
no, it's akin to a new relationship with a lover. It burns pretty hot at first. Okay. And then it gradually kind of settles down to more day-to-day stuff over time.
So what was so you just related this to like a new love and how that burns hot. And I understand that. So what was the first, did you devour more of the scripture? Did you seek out more counsel?
Yeah.
What was the,
basically being aware that I was into something new, so new and so different than anything I ever had, that affected my whole sensorium, my whole orientation. I was encouraged, to get grounded in the basics of what just happened to me, because now I not only knew the concepts in my head theologically or scripturally, now I was alive in it. Okay, Christ said, I came to give you life and to give it to you more abundantly. And I really felt that I had it in spades at that time. And so I basically sat in church quietly. I just wanted to be another face in the crowd, but mostly fellowship with those, of that persuasion, because we had that in common. My other friends didn't have more. I mean, I couldn't stop talking about it at first, not because I was a hard sell, but because I was so overwhelmed, like winning the lottery.
right.
You can't help it. But it took me a while to I just sat quietly and absorbed as much as I could and learned and processed. That's the best way to put it. It's like anything else you experience that's out of the ordinary. You know what's happening or that it happened, but it takes a while later to process it. Okay? It takes a while to process what you've just been through, whether it's a catastrophe or a loss or an accident or a surgery or a death. This was on the positive side.
Right.
And so it took me about 5 or 6 years of just listening and learning.
As you're on this road, were you finding a difference? Because one of the questions I wrote down is, do you see a difference between religion, theology, and spirituality? Because some people will be like, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. Yeah. And some people...
Well, I have a chapter in the book I wrote on it. There's a major difference among and between the three. You'll hear to this day, you'll hear a lot of people today, especially those between the ages of, say, 30 and 45 or 50, they say that they recognize that institutional religion, in fact, people are leaving institutional religion in droves. But people will say in that age group, they're searching and they'll say, well, I'm spiritual, but not religious. They don't identify with any institutional form of the faith, but they know that there's a reality, or they're searching for a reality that goes beyond the institutional form that faith takes,
right?
Which is often very different than the reality itself. It's as different as the menu is to the meal. Okay, I mean, you can't eat the menu. I mean, the menu points to what it is you hope to eat in a few minutes after you order it, but it's not the meal.
Right.
And so I think younger people have a sense. It's called the SBNR generation, the spiritual but not religious generation, or the NONES, NONES. When people are asked on an application, what's your religion, they put none.
Yeah. I mean, and we see that, and there are a lot of I am very regiment. So I think that the benefit of me going to church and being there multiple hours every Sunday, that's why I don't have any patience now, because I used it all up back then with my mom. Right. But once I got to college, got out of high school, I continued to go to church because that's what I did on Sunday mornings. It wasn't like I was really... It was more muscle memory for me. Find a church, you get up. That's how your fucking Sundays start. You go to church every Sunday and you sit there bored out of your mind, and then you go home and you get on with the rest. So I was very lucky. And then I was very lucky to have met my wife, which I always say she is my case for Christ. All I have to do is when people go, "Do you believe in God?" I go and just point to my wife because, yeah, I do.
Right.
But I was very lucky to have met her too. So we met and we had a baby about 9.5 months after we met. So, and we've been together 28 years. So we did things completely backwards. But I remember she went to church with me one Sunday morning because even though she was pregnant, I mean, I still went to church every Sunday morning. And I remember looking at her. She was standing to my right. She was wearing a black dress with, I think, like a white thing. And she was singing the words to the hymns without looking at the hymn book. And I was like, that's amazing. I mean, so I was in love with my wife, and she is by far the reason that I know that the God or the universe exists in a positive form. But I was very lucky to find her as well. So I've been, and that's why I always feel so blessed from God, because my personality, if I would have grown up with the wrong parents, and I was adopted, so I could have very easily got with the wrong parents. If I didn't meet the right woman, I mean, there's so many things that have allowed me to be. Just recently in the High IQ Society, I forget what this title, I think it was about the afterlife. I think it was just about heaven. And I put my, if heaven exists, then it's either going to be amazing, or I think I put heaven's either going to be amazing or it doesn't exist. There's no like,
Well, I'm sure you've read the experiences of people that have near-death experiences. Have you not, or you've heard about them?
I do. And here's why I was asking earlier about sometimes when you see someone that has had an epiphany, has gone through this rebirth, and you want to believe that, and you so much, I want to talk to someone about that, everything. And then when you find someone that has that, you're kind of like, I don't know if I believe it. So there was someone that I know, someone who's actually a pastor. We've known them forever, and a family member of theirs had a possession experience. And this person was there for it. And even though, like, I watch movies and I'm intrigued by, oh my God, could someone really be possessed by an evil spirit and things like this? As they're telling me the story, the person that I would, if I was to pick one person outside my family that would not lie to me, it would be this person. They're just telling me the story, and it's just so unbelievable in my head. I can't wrap my, I actually felt further away from my belief in that after the story, even though it came from a super credible witness, which was really odd for me. So I just didn't know if you ever had anything like that where you came into contact with someone and you're like, I don't know about this right now.
Well, I know obviously there are a number of expressions of belief systems that are, on the fringe. I think one of the gifts you have when you have some spiritual grounding and maturity is a gift of discernment. Now, you can be discerning in an ordinary sense, but I think whatever your strengths are or your spiritual gifts are, they're more acute than, say, the average person, because that's just somehow how the capacities you were given. So you can usually discern when you hear somebody talk whether they're off the radar.
Right. Yeah.
Or in the extremes in one way or the other. The church I got grounded in, I was thankful for. I got a really good Bible. But I eventually left there because I outgrew the group. They were basically a fundamentalist group. The leaders of fundamentalist churches tend to be, they're independent churches. They tend to be authoritarian figures. They tend to be at their worst controlling. They tend to pastor at their worst out of fear. And so they infantilize the congregation. And I reached a point where I didn't need that. So I left. And
how long into your journey? So was this something you felt? I mean, did you were like, I have to step away from this. My faith journey isn't going to grow. I'm not going to grow spiritually if I continue. How long into your journey was this?
This was about 8 years,
okay.
7 or 8 years into my journey.
And during this time, let me stop. So 7 or 8 years into the journey, how is science and your stronger belief system, your spirituality, are they having any conflict at this point? Are
No,
you
none
finding
whatsoever.
it to be enlightening to the work that you're doing?
Well, I've been able to understand in the particular perspective I've been given, and I put it that way because it doesn't come from me; it comes through me. I would call it a download. Um, I did attend several other churches, did not find them to satisfy me. And I'm going to answer your question this way. I'm just going to deviate for a second. I did gravitate toward the contemplative, what's known as the contemplative tradition of Christianity. I found that when I was left alone, I learned how to cultivate God's presence personally and privately in a way that, say, if I got up early in the morning on Sunday before I went to church and spent a little bit of time in the Word and felt I was inspired to make some connections that God was showing me, I resented getting up and going to church. And then while I was in church, the sermon was going on, and I was still getting the inputs and downloads from earlier in the day and writing them down, such that church became irrelevant to me. It was more my personal sense that I didn't want to lose touch of in terms of the group think.
Right.
Okay, because we're all made differently, and I think we're related to differently. Just like as parents, if we have children, they're all different, and you don't relate to each child in the same way. You love them all, but because they're different, you have to gauge how you relate to them in ways to maximize connecting with them and loving them. It's the same way. So I got more concerned about that individual sense and learning how to cultivate that, and understood I was more of a contemplative, where crowds and gatherings and so forth were, being churchy was a distraction to me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And church, not that I became anti-church or anything, but I was tuned into that more. And to get back to your question, I would sit down and the way this came together, this paradigm I put together, it started out as a email to a friend, a colleague, and we were sharing these ideas about how all things are interconnected, because he sort of had a faith dimension. And that turned into 2 emails, three emails. And every time I sat down at the keyboard, it was just flowing through my fingertips. I mean, I would wake up, I would be out in a restaurant eating something, and a notion would come to me that would fit in a certain paragraph I was putting together. I'd write it down on a napkin, put it in my pocket, or I'd wake up at 2:00 in the morning, and a whole bunch of things. I mean, now I understand how, how Beethoven and these other inspired artists, a symphony would come to them. And it was like having a baby. They wouldn't sleep for 3 days until they wrote the whole thing down.
Yeah.
In fact, Beethoven, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I do, as a creative, which is one reason I do this, is when I was working full-time and doing this, I would use one day of the week. Well, I'd have the day off before, but then I would generally get off my regular job at 6:00 at night. But then I would work till like morning, till generally 5 or 6, until my wife got up, and I would pass her, and I would be like, wake me, make sure I'm up before you leave, and I may get 45 minutes of sleep, because that's why I do this now instead of, because, and sometimes I wish, and I know my wife would be, I wish that, that what was flowing through you was maybe a little bit more religious, maybe a little bit more impactful on her life or everyone's life. Not that this isn't, but it's just different. But I do understand. And sometimes I do wish, like I say, if I die right now, which God has tried to kill me a couple times in the last couple weeks, so we have upped our life insurance this last week. It was funny because I always say, listen to what people say or do. They'll tell you exactly what's going on. And a couple weeks ago, I'm standing outside during an electrical storm, because why wouldn't you? But I'm on my covered porch. A tree like 50 yards from me got struck by lightning and literally exploded. And somehow all the shrapnel and pieces that would have killed me if they would have hit me, impaled me, they were impaled on the ground, somehow never touched me. Never did. It literally made a circle around me. And then a few days later, the golf course that we live on was closed, and the mower shot a golf ball off the golf course, shattered a window that was like 6 feet to my left at eye level. And if I would have hit, so I tell my wife this, and she was the one that reminded. She goes, "You always say, listen to what people say or do. They're trying to tell you something." I believe
Sure.
God is trying to tell you something. So, so yeah, but I'm confident that if I died right now, that
Yeah.
I don't have any qualms about my own soul. I literally, I'm
Right.
good in everything, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean I don't see people sometime and just wish, like our pastor at our church, which there's a reason our church is 24,000, and for lack of a better term, so he's kind of a rock star. I mean, that's why when I first went, every time it just seemed like he was saying something to me. And it was just like, he's
Mhm.
personal. I've known him now for a few years now and everything, but I see him and I'm like, why am I not that fire? Like, I can't tell you the last time I read the Bible. I mean, I've read a lot of it. I've probably read it cover to cover 3 times, but that was more out of,
Well,
uh,
that's the menu. I
yeah,
mean, it's important to read the menu, but in that the words, when the scripture says this, are spirit inspired, even though the authors may be dead. I'm talking about the apostles
right,
or in the Old Testament, whoever the authors of those books were. If they're spiritually inspired, they're supposed to have, they're meant to have, they're meant to resonate with your own spirit like wind over coals, and sort of bring it to the place of fervency,
right,
because it's really the presence. I've learned that it's, as I use the scripture for warm-ups. I read it, and then I start to feel the warm up to the presence of God, and then I put it down, and now I'm present to that presence, and I'm just with it as you would be a good friend. If you know somebody well and you're sitting with them, you don't feel pressure to talk. You could just be quiet for a while, just be with each other.
right.
So it's that type of experience. But I hear what you're saying. With the strict letter of the word is like, um, you're reading about God. You're not necessarily present to God, even though God is present to you.
Well, the way I relate it in my head is if you go to a sporting event and you really enjoy a team. Like
Right.
I'm from Tampa originally. I am a big Bucks, Lightning, Rays fan. But if I
Right.
go there, I may not cheer as loud or as fervently as the
Yeah.
person next to me, but it doesn't mean I'm any less of a fan or any less invested in what they're doing. And that's what I always try to tell myself, that I don't have to
Mhm.
paint my face. I
Oh,
don't have to,
no,
and scream or have my shirt off. Well, and
no.
I'm used to living in Kansas now, the Chiefs games where it gets sub-zero, but I was going to say being in Tampa with your shirt off in 65-degree weather, I don't really think is something that, but that's how I try to relate it to myself. When I try to say, just because I'm not them doesn't mean my
No,
love or anything else
no.
is any less than what theirs is.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about groups. When they become belonging systems and have tacit or explicit ways of wanting people to conform, like a batch of cookies, that's not good. There's great variety and individuality in creation. You have to be, you know, finding your God identity is finding your own uniqueness as to how you were made and how you're developing, and that's not quite the same as with anybody else.
Right.
And so you just have to be that and be comfortable with that, which sounds like you are.
Yeah, I am. And yeah,
Yeah.
I guess, and like I say, I have a lot of things about heaven. Like I'm not like, I think our lives can be on the path to eternity, but I'm not personally positive the next step is like heaven and eternity. Like, so what I had mentioned that there was a person that said, hey, we'll be singing at the feet of God. I was like, I don't think so. And then one day I was talking to someone else once, and I remember this. I was actually talking to this guy, Lenny, and someone overheard us talking about heaven. And I go, well, what do you think it will be like? She goes, I don't know, but we'll probably have a job. And I was like, what? We're going to have a job in heaven. I looked at Lenny. I go, what do you think? He goes, I don't know about that. But then I started thinking. So this is literally, and this is within the last like 8 years. So
Right.
around 50-ish probably is when I started thinking about this. But I'm like, why should I, if I live, let's say 80 years, which would be very generous to me at this point. But let's say I live to be 80 years old. And let's say that the earth is somewhere between 8,000 and, X million, whatever, a big number that we can't even conceive. How can my 80 years of whatever, how can I be so good? And I get it. I understand that. But part of me just feels like this is like a way station, that it's just a continuing journey. And I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with that because I'm always like, and that's my problem, that when I talk about hell, because people don't think I take it seriously enough. And I'm just like, well, first of all, I don't think I'm going to be there, so I'm not overly concerned. But I also don't think, I could think of probably a few people in history that may earn eternal damnation, but there are a lot of other people that may have found their way there, and not always they weren't exposed to the word of Christ. They weren't exposed to other people that gave you, that wanted to talk to you, that planted a seed, that wanted to grow. I mean, so I just,
so I probably needed it. I probably needed it more than the next person. I don't see it as as something that makes you elite or something like that.
Yeah, but that's kind of where I am right now, that I feel like, I feel like I'm saved to move on, whatever that means. But I just, to me, eternity. So this is what, sometimes I talk to my wife, like, I'm like, hey, you should quit your job. We should do this podcasting thing full time as a team. And I believe she said, nah, I'm good. So I was like, so you don't even want to spend an extra like 40 hours a week with me sharing a job together, but yet you're okay with eternity. So you'll spend eternity with me, but then an extra 40 hours a week here on earth, that's way too much to ask. So I am always growing.
Well, according to the scriptures, if they're accurate in quoting Christ in one of the gospels, they ask him a question about marriage, because in the Hebraic tradition, if a man was married to a woman and had several brothers and he died, the next brother in line had, dibs on the wife. So the Pharisees, who were the religionists of his time, the fundamentalists, they asked him a question. They tried to trick him with questions. They explained the situation. Guy has a wife, he dies. Which of the brothers gets, the wife? And Christ said, he called them foolish and said, you neither in heaven we neither marry nor are given in marriage. So according to his words, you'll be around the people who predeceased you, that and other people, but I don't think there's what we know as marriage down here, which is primarily for biological, for reproduction purposes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how I've always said too. I'm like, no one wants to be with me for eternity. I mean, so in here, I was just thinking about, and I don't know why I suppress all these thoughts, not suppress them. But one of my other things, when I would go to funerals, when my dad passed a couple years ago and some people around his age that were friends of the family passed, generally at the funeral, everyone's like, oh, they're entering gates of the heaven. All that proceeded before them are there and greeting them. And my wife would sometimes grab my knee, meaning I'm shaking my head, because I didn't agree with that. And my whole theory behind that is the Walt Disney World relationship with heaven. That if you pass on, my dad died 2 years ago. So he doesn't know, we don't know when I'm going to die. My wife may, but I don't. Anyway, if he he's in heaven. Heaven is like Disney World. I'm not going to ask him to stand at the front gate and wait for me to show up. Well, when are you going to be there? I don't know. You don't know how long you're going to be? No, but stand at the front gate and just wait for me. I'm always like, hey, I've always joked that for the people that die before me, I will find you in heaven. You don't need to wait at the pearly gates. You don't need to say hi to me because I probably won't even pay attention to
Well,
you,
there's no
honestly.
concept of time there, so there's no such thing as waiting.
See, these are the things I never think about.
It's
Yeah.
always now, if you can imagine that. It's sort of like having Alzheimer's. It's always now. There's no tense.
That sounds like our well, they're grown now, but when they were kids, when it was dinner time, now. It's always now,
Right now.
dinner time. I wanted to ask you, there was one of the bullet points that you had with your book was how can God be everywhere at once? Is this something that you had felt but maybe couldn't quantify before your transformation, or is this something that you acknowledged after?
It's an integral part of the traditional Christian doctrine. That God is omnipresent, meaning there's nowhere God is not. And in the Psalms, the psalmist David said, I could climb the highest mountain and you're there, go in the deepest part of the sea and you're there, you're everywhere. So I read that as doctrine. And according to the church mothers and fathers, who established that doctrine, it's always been so. And it was so in the Judaic tradition and most religious traditions, I think, believe that. But I understood later on how that happened, how that can be so. Okay. I've come to understand through my reading and my study and what's become clear, things converging in my mind, different things, different fields of study. God can be present everywhere because everything in the universe is divinity or God appearing in the specific form that creation shows up. God can appear in the form of you, me, zillions of other people, a tree, a dog. In other words, the spirit is the highest part of matter, okay, which becomes conscious of itself in humans. No other creatures can manifest that, or entities can manifest that as an expression or an embodiment of divinity or spirit. But it becomes conscious of itself in humans.
That was the Doberman agreeing with you, by the way. She was in the background agreeing with you.
All right. But I explain that in more detail, but that's it in a nutshell. In fact, that coincides with the understanding of quantum physics. Okay, that the smallest parts of matter have the property of mind or consciousness. And that's how they integrate themselves into molecules and more complex manifestations of creation. They self-organize.
Right.
How do they know how to do that? Unless there's an intelligence that's built into them.
You had also, at one of the points on your book, you had mentioned ending religious divisiveness. Is that, and I was going to ask, is that religion on religion divisiveness? And is that something that, I guess I should even back up. And during your epiphany, during this change for you, did you ever think, oh, well, maybe I should explore Buddhism or Taoism? So here's the interesting thing that I have remembered this in the past, but my grandfather, who was the pastor in Tampa, when we moved up to Kansas City, he took a small church in Pittsburgh, Kansas. And I remember when we used to go visit him, I was still fairly young at the time, but there wasn't TV, there wasn't stuff to do down there in Pittsburgh, Kansas. So I would read. I was a voracious reader. And he had books, being a pastor, on Buddhism and all these different religions of the world. So I remember reading those and being so far advanced. Like other people, they'd mention a word and I would spit something out and they're like, how does that kid know that? But so did you ever was it always like, this is it? I don't have any questions. There's nothing else. The blinders, not blinders are on. That's probably a negative term, but I mean, were you so focused on Christ at this point and being filled by the Spirit that you didn't even look at anything else?
No, one of the things I realized is the extreme limitations in being human, even having your spirit activated. Okay, because the brain and nervous system are geared for survival and adaptation in a three-dimensional world of space and time, meaning they filter out everything else. There's a tendency for the brain and nervous system to be reducing organs that filter out everything else except what you need to know in order to live your life, earn your living, pay your bills, make friends, and because people who do psychedelics have an expanded sense of consciousness, which is artificially induced.
Right.
Okay, where they have spiritual experiences, but they're artificially induced. And people who have near-death experiences, okay, they are now separate from this limiting thing that we inhabit for X number of years, and they experience what's known as unitive knowledge. They, in that state, they remember knowing all things and how everything is related to everything else. Now, when they return and inhabit their bodies again and come to, they don't have that anymore, but they remember having that in that near-death experience state because they're not encumbered anymore by the brain and nervous system.
Right.
In fact, the neurosciences now know, they used to think that consciousness was a one-to-one function to brain function. Like that, and now we know that consciousness survives the brain on physical death, so that the brain is more like, the brain is the brain in terms of how it ordinarily functions, but we now know it's like an antenna, that the field of consciousness is everywhere. And so people who are inspired artistically and so forth, or religiously, or in any other way in their calling, are tuned in some way,
Right.
to that energy field that surrounds everybody.
Well, and so here, and we're going to make a big jump because there is so much to talk to you about. Before I hit record,
How are we doing on time?
we're at about an hour and 20 minutes. So that's
Are
why.
you okay?
Oh no, I'm fine. But that's why I know that I had told you originally before I hit the record button for this audio podcast is that I had made notes. I figured I'd try to keep it around an hour and a half because that's always a sweet spot with the listeners. But I did tell you I thought I had enough notes for multiple shows, which we'll get to. So I don't want to feel like I'm jumping around too much, but the people need to have an incentive to go out and buy the Ambient Christ, the untold story of God and science, scripture and spirituality. So I want to go back to the book real quick for a second. So,
Sure.
So you've had your journey, you've been on the journey. At what point of this journey did you think I need to share this with other people? I need to get, just like there are times, like I say, my wife would get so annoyed. The reason I would stay up all night is she would get annoyed because I would sleep, get up, because it was just easier for me to get up. So at what point did it just flow and you have to start writing your book?
Well, like I said, as I was having an email exchange with a colleague, I felt a powerful sense of inspiration where things were converging in my mind based on my experiences, my knowledge of science and the behavioral field and spirituality. And it became very clear to me that what I had was pretty powerful, pretty unique, and pretty distinctive. Because I have since become aware there are this notion of convergence where all different fields are coming together in ways that they're unifying or they're seeing how they intersect is happening around the world in what are called various synergy groups. People that come from different fields that have a spiritual dimension that understand the notion of oneness, or in terms of spirituality or entanglement.
I'm sorry to stop you right there. I want to ask, because I didn't even think about this before. In the scientific community, whether it's just your field, maybe your field specifically, or scientists as a whole, how prevalent is one's faith? Well, regardless of what that faith is that prevalent?
Common. No, it's not common. In fact, historically, prominent people in the religious world, it was taboo to talk about science and God, and even in the same breath, they were called heretics, and their books were banned, and so on and so forth. And this wasn't just in the Middle Ages. This was in the 50s and 60s. Okay, so generally, the two disciplines are sort of at odds because they reflect two different ways of knowing things. One is rational and empirical, you can weigh and measure it, science. And the other is transrational or intuitive. That's another way of knowing. There are different ways of knowing things. Science says if I can't see it, measure it, weigh it, hold it, touch it, taste it, it doesn't exist.
Right.
Okay. And spirituality, of course, is on an entirely different level. It's more intuitive and transrational or extrasensory.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because I say that and it's been the same story for 28 years, but the moment I saw my wife, and I had never thought about getting married. I was 28, she was 21. Marriage was never on my mind. But I knew, in fact, the next morning I had told my roommate, which was a friend of hers, I have met the woman that I used to say that I met the woman I was going to marry, but in retrospect, I don't think I ever used that terminology. I think I just said I met the woman I'd spend the rest of my life with. It was it was so life-changing my entire life changed. And I was fine with that. But that kind of led to that question earlier about how aware were you as you were in the middle of it? Because I was hyper aware when I met Bobby and we were first courting and all that. I was hyper aware and hypersensitive to everything concerning my relationship with her. Right. And that's why I'd asked, because also in your relationship with Christ or however.
Well, I was able to connect the dots and show how each of them are seamlessly co-present to the other. They're not separate. They're only separate in ordinary human thought, but in reality, substantively, they're not.
Okay.
They're not.
I wanted to ask this question, because and maybe you won't give me the answer. Once again, let's drive him to the book. Once again, The Ambient Christ. Who is the greatest science/theologian, and why did they die in obscurity? Because I may have to go watch YouTube videos all night now about someone.
Can I answer that question by taking a minute to grab my charger? Because I'm running out of gas and I didn't have it close by.
Yeah,
can I take like 30 seconds?
You can. Do that? So, yep.
In the book, first of all, let me say one thing about the book, at the risk of sounding like a huckster, and I'm not really being that. It's my own biased evaluation. I'm aware of all the people around the globe, and some of them are very prominent, theologians or theologian scientists, that are trying to put a model together that harmonizes with all fields of knowledge, no exceptions, including the arts. None of them have done it yet. I feel I've done it until someone shows me I haven't, in which case I'll have to admit I have more homework to do. Now, you can't know everything, so I can't boast that I know all fields of knowledge. But so far, my model intersects with every single field of knowledge and can accommodate it.
Are you having that checked by, is that something that can even be checked by people in that field? Are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what some publishers have asked me, have you been peer reviewed? I can't find anybody I'm just being as honest with you as I can. I can't find anybody who's gone as far as I can, who put all the pieces together. So I don't know who's going to review me. That doesn't mean they don't exist out there.
Right.
but I can't get the big time publishers won't publish this book. I had to self-publish it because they only go with tested authors that they can make money off of right away.
Right. Well,
first time authors don't have a chance.
So, and I apologize, Joe, for not doing this earlier. Where can they find your book?
You can find it on Amazon.
Okay. So, and for all of you listening, you will be able to find links to Joe on the Instagram page, so that you'll see it because you follow
book
already.
Listings.
Yeah. So we'll do that as well. So I have a link in that as well because it is. I told you in advance that I could probably do 4 shows about this, and I feel like I know that we've just scratched the surface as well. But I wanted to come up with. Unless there's something that you want to do to tie this up, I want to. Gosh, there's 2 questions.
You want me to
here.
answer that question? You want to go on to another?
Oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There was back in the well, he actually served. He was a French Jesuit. And I did a chapter on him. All the chapters, I took a number of different men in history who, in their time, were considered mavericks, but they were geniuses and were dubbed as such long after they died. I put 5 of them together to form my model. So to answer your question, the first one was a Frenchman by the name of Teilhard de Chardin. He was a Jesuit paleontologist. Okay. And he was the first one to come up with the idea that science and spirituality are really not different. They're 2 aspects of the same reality, like 2 sides of a coin, and they're really combined. And because his heyday was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, he said that one day science will develop a discipline, which he called an ultraphysics, that would be able to explain how the 2 are one from a scientific standpoint. Now, since his time, the field of quantum physics, which studies such things, is in fact, according to his vision, been developed, which enabled me and others who were doing my work to know there's a relationship between quantum physics, which studies the ultra invisible things in the universe, and spirit. Okay, you can put those 2 things together.
Right.
The visible world comes from and is connected to the invisible world. So he wrote some books that were not, his books were banned while he was alive, and after his death, his friends saw to it that he was published. And it was only after his death when his books were published, and the Vatican, was sort of shameful that they censored his books, realized that he was one of the first pioneers in being able to put the 2 fields together, and others have kind of taken up where he's left off.
How much? So,
but he's unheard of. He's an unknown.
Yeah, and it is strange that someone that did have the impact like them is unknown. But it's weird because if you throw, that's the other thing about being in high IQ societies is that the reason because you can have a conversation. That's not a name that goes unknown and in that society, whereas there are a lot of things that I can mention and I'll just get like a blank look on someone's face. I'm like, okay, I get it.
Yeah. But I explain, his contributions, in greater detail, which we can't go into here. But he was very courageous. He was a French Jesuit who was very bright and did a lot of field work and made contributions to anthropology and was not afraid to combine the 2. In fact, the French clerics were not required to fight to serve in the war, and he volunteered to be a stretcher bearer in World War I, and he won a number of medals for going out on the battlefield and risking his life to save soldiers. So he was a very rugged person, a very bright person, and but his books were banned from seminaries and other places, and now they're generally accepted. Just like about 10 years ago, the Vatican apologized for jailing Galileo 500 years ago for saying, by way of his telescope, that the Earth traveled around the sun, not the other way around. They put him in jail for that and made him recant. And the only reason he recanted is because he didn't want to be in jail the rest of his life.
I know. And that I wonder about
That's when science and spirituality started to go their separate ways. When you were a scientist, you didn't dare mention what you discovered to your priest.
Yeah, I couldn't. Yeah, and that's hard because there are certain truths in science. I mean, so I don't know. I just don't understand why people have not always, many people have thought that the two can't coexist. Like,
here's what he said that it's the most salient thing that I can share here. He had an understanding that human evolution was taking us in the direction of moving away from separation consciousness, seeing all things as divided and separate, including religions, to what he called a unitive consciousness, a sense that all things are one. The actual experience of that is that's actually what people feel who have near-death experiences. That's what they report. But he said that that's the direction human evolution is going. Yeah. Because humans have a history of being divided, warlike. I mean, take a look at how divided the country is right now and the wars that are going on around the world. And, we're not, humans as a whole, as a civilization, aren't very, very nice people to each other.
No.
No,
we are not. I mean,
his vision was that knowledge was going in the direction of unitive consciousness, and in its spirituality and spiritual consciousness and Christ, that it's going to bring it there.
I hope the time frame is shorter rather than longer for that.
It has to be, because we're in a pickle right now in terms of climate change and a number of other things.
I know. And of course, I don't help because I'll send out texts like, I'm all for climate change. I can have this tan in February in Kansas. So I don't really. And at this point at 56, I always feel like the climate change thing is now on my kids and not on me. Mm-hmm. And I apologize for that, kids, but I'm just going to say it wasn't me.
He's the one whose quote was, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. That was a quote from him.
And I will agree with that. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree to that.
Now, the other maverick is Nikola Tesla.
So that was one of the questions. So one of the questions I wrote down was the second coming of Tesla, which I think, hold on, I got to find this. I didn't, you can also be found at, your book can be found at www.joeknowsgod.com, correct?
That's my website. Yeah.
Yes, your website. So on that today, I had written down, because I think that's where I saw the bullet point, the second coming of Nikola Tesla. And then I wrote next to that, why is this needed? I mean, I know a lot about Tesla and the things that he did, how much I can separate fact with him and fiction, with YouTube videos or everything else that I've seen. I don't know. So, but that was one of the questions. I said I had two. You just got me to lead with or finish with that one. The second coming of Nikola Tesla. Do you think there is someone that will be here that will be as transformative as Nikola Tesla?
Yeah, he was 100 years ahead of his time.
Which means you're wrong. So we talk about that all the time in the society, that if you're early, it's considered the same thing as being wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he said the 21st, he died in 1943 and said that the 21st, he understood why he was not accepted in his time. And I'll give you some reasons why. And he said the scientist is one who builds for the future. I know my ideas aren't being accepted now, but the 21st century is mine. And of course, people are beginning now to embrace what his contributions were. Now, the reason I called it the second coming, is Nikola Tesla, because he was central to the science spirituality model that I put together for this reason. The Big Bang Theory in science says that the Earth, everything in the universe was created in a moment of explosion from a reality that was about as big as the head of a pin and exploded and created everything in the universe. That's a scientific fact, which is still exploding. The Webb telescope was what they sent out in space to find out where the origins were, which are still traveling outward. Now, the Big Bang Theory of creation is consistent with the Genesis account. I'll show you how this relates to Tesla. Because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and that's the way Genesis started. And the word light in the first chapter of Genesis is referred to 10 times. Okay, that implies, the earth was without form and void, and then this explosion happened. And it was an explosion basically of light and heat energy. That's what began the whole thing. Okay, so the core of the scriptures, if you study them, there's a number of different ways you can study them, but I traced how God is. The most common metaphor for divinity in religions around the world is light. And when God appears in, say, the scriptures, there's always light involved. Okay, so Nikola Tesla was very aware of how integral electromagnetism was in the created order. Now, electromagnetism, the spectrum of electromagnetism is the spectrum of light. You have the visible spectrum, the colors of the rainbow, and then you have the invisible part, like radiation and gamma rays and microwaves, the whole spectrum. That's all electromagnetism. Now, Tesla was aware that all of creation was a manifestation of electromagnetic phenomena. And his famous statement was, if you want to know the secrets of the universe, study energy, which electromagnetism is, frequency, and vibration. Okay, now, he realized that everything in the universe, in fact, Einstein affirmed what he said and said, we're just slowed down light and sound waves. When sound and light vibrate at high frequencies, they're invisible. The lower the frequency, the more visible or solid or material appearing the out. It's all light energy in various forms. Okay, so Tesla understood that, and he knew that, A, and B, he discovered a way of tapping into the invisible part of creation and its electromagnetic roots. And said that he went, he was a scientist. He wasn't much of a businessman, and he was funded by J.P. Morgan and other wealthy people to do his experiments. And he came to Morgan one day and said, I've developed a way of extracting electromagnetism from empty space. And it's so abundant there, I've discovered, and science has since validated this. Now catch this, that there's enough energy in a coffee cup size volume of electromagnetism that I can extract from empty space. There's enough energy in that to boil all the oceans in the world of 1 cup of it. And I know how to extract it so that we can run everything on it. Because everything is then, as is now, run on coal, oil, and gas. Well, they've gone to solar and everything else,
right.
But okay. Morgan refused to fund his invention because he said you can't put a meter on it. So he was thinking of making money off it.
Always.
Now, they have since found that you can, they know how to draw that energy out, but the coal, oil, and gas consortiums don't want those innovations to go on because of the money issues.
So do you think they will ever get out to help humanity? I mean, like, I get it. It's all about the dollar. I mean, that's what makes me upset every once in a while. But I do. it just seems like if that was technology that was available, it just
100 years
seems
ago.
it just seems abhorrent that that's kept away from the public. I mean, yeah, well,
Well, it is.
yeah, yeah.
It is. Because we know big money runs things.
So you were speaking more figuratively about a second. You're talking about the second coming of his ideas from 100 years ago. That's what we're going to. Yeah. Okay. So I was thinking that there was literally going to be someone else that we're looking for that I didn't know about. You were going to name drop someone like Joe Schmo, and I'd be like, I've never heard of Joe Schmo, and you'd be like, he's the second coming of Nikola Tesla. So, but it's that he was so far ahead of his time, and like I say, he was
ahead of his time. In fact, Einstein was once asked, what's it feel like to be the smartest man on the planet? And he said, I don't know. You'll have to ask Nikola Tesla.
Yeah, must be nice. Yeah.
So, but he was one of them because basically, as Einstein and others in quantum physics know, everything is vibrating energy, either light and sound, everything in the universe.
I remember showing.
Now, Jesus' self-identifier was, I am the light of the world. And I think very few people understood that he meant that literally.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to hear that some of those things with Tesla will be, I mean, that they're going to be more evident to us now, that they're big, that they, I always tell my wife or anyone else that will listen, like when we're shown something, like people will talk about AI. That's everything now. And people are using, I use AI to help me in business and everything. I go, this is just the AI that they're letting us morons see, right? This isn't anywhere near this isn't the best AI. Like, I still think AI is acting stupid, but that's just me. Because every once in a while I'll ask it something and it'll just give me an off-the-wall answer. So I think it's dumb when I really know it's not. And I know it's listening to me right now. Hi, AI. Or Google, I guess.
There's an interesting story I can tell you quickly about his birth. When he was born, he was delivered by a midwife.
Uh-huh.
And at the time he was being born, there was a very powerful lightning and thunderstorm going on. It was very, very, very powerful storm. And the midwife, when she delivered him, and handed him to his mother, she said, I don't think this is a good omen that he's being born at this time. And his mother, who was a person of faith, said, no, he's going to make his contribution in the area of light.
Very foretelling. Do you know if Tesla, was he a spiritual person?
He, as a scientist, he was reluctant to talk about it publicly, but he knew that all of the basic forces in the world, in the basis of creation, the invisible forces were electromagnetic or consisting of light in some form in one way or another. He knew that, and he knew his inspirations. This is another story. He never married. He was in fact,
he had a pigeon, didn't he?
He's the one that made, what's that?
He had a pigeon that he was very fond of. I think I've heard a story of.
Yeah, that's right. He did pay attention to pigeons, but he's the one that made Edison famous, because though Edison invented the light bulb, he didn't know how to carry the electricity over long distances. All he could do then was have a generator at every block, and that would be too expensive to keep the, going over long distances. So Tesla worked for him and invented alternating current. And Edison took all the credit for it. But
he was in a duel with, when he was working on alternating current, someone else was working, was it DC? That there were I don't,
Although,
or
well,
was
he
it
got in an
Edison?
argument with Edison. Edison tried to discredit him and say that alternating current was dangerous and
And
direct
killed a
current
whole
was
bunch of
safe.
dogs or something, I think. I don't
Yeah,
know.
he killed elephants, he killed dogs, he killed horses to show, how dangerous alternating current was. When in fact he ended up adopting it and made millions off it.
Well,
Tesla got nothing. But
yes.
Tesla didn't marry because his ideas. He said, I wouldn't do this to a woman. He said, because I need to be alone. This is when my ideas come to me. And they come to me in bits and pieces, and then I put them all together and patent them. And so he was a man who understood where his inspirations came from. He didn't take credit for them.
Well, I'm going to ask a side note then to bring back to your writing of your book. Did
Right.
you, so I find myself, I had mentioned it earlier, I like the quiet of the night. I like the peacefulness of the night. I like it when I can, and it doesn't mean I don't have stuff going on. I'll put background music on or something, so I'll still do something, but I like the piece of it just basically being myself, because I do, not like him, of course, but I get bits and pieces, and then I'm writing down notes, and then I'm converging those notes, and that's why they get color coded, because they're not in order. So I have to get them together sometime. Did you find yourself, or when you're feeling most confident, even continuing to study and further your research, do you find it better to do it at a certain point, first thing in the morning, last thing when everyone's asleep? Do
Yeah,
you?
I'm sharper in the morning.
Okay.
I wrote this over a period of 3 years because I was still working part-time, but I would get up early in the morning, say at 5, and write until 7 or 8. And then, on weekends and holidays, and I did it piecemeal. But I found that every field of knowledge was coming together, pivoting on the basics of this model I put together. I didn't find any exceptions, including what's the facts that are known on extraterrestrial consciousness and technology, and also such phenomenon as the Shroud of Turin. I'm not big on religious relics, but there was some profound scientific studies on how that image was made on the shroud.
So
It's consistent with light being the basis of the created order.
So yeah, because I am familiar with the Shroud of Turin, which I don't think I don't
I
have
have a chapter on it.
I'm writing a note about it right now, because I think
Yeah, I
that
call the chapter the first selfie.
I remember seeing that note, and I was like, how do you know when the first selfie was taken? Come on, man.
That was
So
2,000 years ago. Read about it.
I know. So that makes great sense.
No,
So
but there were 5 in a nutshell. There were 5 research teams that have studied that over a period of years, and all of their data corroborate that the imprint that was made on the shroud. Now picture Christ laying flat on inside the tomb of Nicodemus, volunteered his tomb for Christ to be buried in. The stone was rolled over. There's a shroud put around him, goes over the top of his body and underneath him. Okay. The imprint is made on the top of the shroud and on the bottom of the shroud. And they determined, now if you see him, envision him laying prone, that there was an axis of light. And that's part of the premise. There's an axis of light that runs through the center of every created thing at every scale. An axis, just like the world has an electromagnetic pole, north and south pole. There was an axis that ran from his head to his feet, where the energy that was equal to the total energy in a nuclear reactor went from that axis forward to the top of his body, the ventral part, and downward to make the imprint of both the front and back of his body, just like in like milliseconds. That's what created the resurrection. And those burn marks were not colored. They weren't made by an artist or a forger. They had that kind of electromagnetic power to them, I put that in there because it was consistent with my theory that the substance of all visible form the invisible substance of all visible form is light energy. And basically our spirit and soul, that which separates from the material body, is made of that energy.
And the Shroud of Turin, I believe, if I remember my childhood, like late 70s, I think it was in the forefront of the news. I remember that being as a child, and, technology wasn't as good. So it was very, they couldn't really do much, but I just remember that being on the news. And
So it couldn't be a forgery because it bears all the imprints of a crucified man, including they never put the crown of thorns on anybody else.
Right.
With the Romans. So there's clearly blood marks around the scalp and on the shroud itself. But there's something like, the evidence for it being authentic, and I'm not big on religious relics because so many of them were forgery, made the 5 teams conclude that it's 95% likely that it was the original shroud, including the linens, the pollen on the cloth came from that area that's only specific, and a whole host of other things that make people raise an eyebrow as to its authenticity. But I used it because light was central in understanding what made that imprint.
Right. Yeah.
And an intense form of light, not just any light.
Yeah.
And they had no technology back then that could make an imprint with those intensities.
And with the technology that we have now and in the recent past, I think that would have been fully debunked by this point. My wife watches a lot of those, whodunit mystery show, and it's always like something small they forget to do or don't do, or, and so you would think that if they were trying to forge that at some point, that,
Well, another brief story. One of the men who was asked to participate on one of the research teams was an expert in light and photography, and he was the foremost authority or something. He was an American. They had asked him because he was the #1 guy in the world, and they wanted to get this thing over with. Is this real or is it a forgery? So he didn't want to go because he had to be over in Italy for several months, and he reluctantly agreed to go. And he was of the Jewish faith, and he was skeptical to begin with. But when he went over there and took part in the study, the more he said, and there's a documentary on YouTube, the more he got into it, and the more he realized how real this thing was, and he converted.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So and I'm going to, this will be my last point because it's interesting. We're talking, you mentioned conversion
to the faith.
To the faith, that you had mentioned earlier at how many people were leaving like mainline churches and the faith. And I feel like they are looking for something. And that is, and I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you get put in a position like you were to have others around you that at least were interacting with you as you initiated this faith journey. He gets invited to go check out the Shroud of Turin as a person of Jewish faith and comes out of that a changed person. Sometimes I wonder, because my journey was so different. I was in the faith. That's just what I was. And so
everybody's faith experience is different.
Yeah.
So
it's amazing though to hear the stories like this. Now, we mentioned a couple things. Shroud of Turin. You mentioned UFOs at some point. I also want to throw out there 2 words: deep state, because that was something that I had read at joeknowsgod.com. But those are great questions. I hope that you'll come back in the future. My head, if I didn't mention this before we started recording, most people will know this. As soon as we get done with this, I will probably start writing down notes for the next time, because my head is swimming with the amount of information, because it's given me points of
There's a
views.
lot of stuff. I had to put together a lot of stuff, so I don't, there's a lot to digest.
There is, and that's what was one thing that made it hard doing notes is like, oh well, this is interesting. Well, that's interesting. Is this more? And so I had all these different avenues, and then I was like, okay, we're just gonna see where this goes because with what you've done and your background and your book, there's enough information here to.
Yeah, like one of my friends said, there's a whole 4-year degree in it. But that's how everything came together. But I put the dots out there. They aren't my dots. They're Tesla's dots, Einstein's dots, and a bunch of other people. But I show how they all come together to form a picture. And it's very rich. It's very rich and very intense. And it was like having a child.
Well, let me ask one final question. At what level, comprehension wise? Like, so sometimes I get used to being around me, my family, and then talking to people in the society. And so sometimes I'll forget that there's like, how digestible is your book to take those dots and fix that picture?
Question. It's not an easy read, not by design, but by nature.
Okay.
I was aware of the reader and tried to dumb it down as much as I could. Okay. That's my job when I work with people, to put myself in their place and to have the kind of conversations with them that they can understand about what I'm seeing that they need to see. And I gauge it according to, where they are in terms of their capacities.
Right.
But I realized in the beginning that no one has ever done anything like this. In fact, I know a number of theologians and academics and scientists. I know of them. I don't know them personally. All of whom are taking a shot at this. And I've said to several of them that I communicate with, this model, this science spirituality model, will not be done by a theologian, will not be done by an academic, or will not be done by a scientist. It's going to be somebody outside of those three disciplines, because people who are in those disciplines, even if they have a unitive sense of things coming together, are so steeped in their particular discipline that they're going to be hampered by it unless they can get extraordinary distance on where they are to include other things. I'm in none of those.
Right. Well,
I'm in none of those disciplines.
I entered a job in the telecommunications industry, which was not my background. My very first day, they were like, oh, you're the guy that doesn't know anything. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But the cool thing is sometimes I would say stuff because I was just ignorant. And they'd be like, oh, we never thought of that, or we didn't anticipate that, or anything else. So I do understand how sometimes people that are so locked into it that you need someone that's not wrapped up in those disciplines. So I totally get that. And it's good that, so you said that they were taking a shot at it now. So are they the ones kind of peer reviewing your work, or are they doing something?
And I'll tell you why.
Kind of parallel to you.
You can't get through to the big names, right? It's very difficult to get through to them. Some of them have carried my commentaries on their blogs because they know I've got some points made.
Right.
But they're very reluctant to, like, for example, I've written some articles that they included on their blogs. But if I write something, and I have to be very careful about this, that goes beyond their level, if they're the star of the show, they won't carry it.
Yeah.
They won't carry it.
Okay.
It's just like if I wrote a hit song today, but I'm not a musician, there's nobody I'm going to be able to get through to give that song to.
Right.
No, you can't get through to them. But I do know that being familiar with their work, that they have made reference to, one person wrote a book called The Cosmic Christ, that Christ is not specific to a given sectarian religion, but he's universal as he manifests in creation. And another one wrote a book called The Universal Christ with the same idea, but they don't explain how God is universal or cosmic.
Oh, they just say he
how the
is.
incarnation, how God incarnates himself in matter. I go digitally through the how of it in great detail.
Right.
Trying to, I still have to be technical in order to get the job done, but so it's going to be a challenging read. I want to be
Right.
honest with potential readers. It's not a book for everybody. You have to be interested in.
Have you ever thought about like serializing that, like as a podcast or something, like doing chapter by chapter or breaking down,
Yeah,
or
it could
to
be done
try to
through
make
a
it, because
video.
you're talking about how in your practice, and I used to do this as a trainer, trying to make something digestible for someone so they want to absorb it and things like that. Because
Right.
when I used to be a big golfer, I have a book called Every Shot Counts, and it's literally the mathematics of golf. Even the most fervent golfers that I would play with didn't want to read this book, but I'm a math guy, so I loved being able to read it. But I think if I took that and broke it, this is what it says, and this is how it affects you, or what, that maybe I could get a tie. So I didn't know. Have you ever thought about doing something like that, as the big publishers aren't wanting to do that? Is that, do you have alternative avenues that you may be able to generate eyes upon this book?
Yeah, that's a possibility, and I know there are services out there that would help me with that. But again, self-publishers have to self-market, and so I'm going to be investing in this in the next year or so, and have to decide which avenues I want to invest in. That may be one of them. I just started on that in the beginning of this year, and I think this is the second podcast I've had.
Well,
But I'm just beginning that. But I think that's a great idea. I really do.
I just recently had someone on the podcast that actually does a serial podcast called After the Apocalypse. And so, but, so they're basically, it's going to be a 5-book set after next season after that. So it was basically books that were written. They did it as a podcast first, and then they're going to release the books as a set like that. And so I had never really even considered or something like that, because that's not the type of podcast that I generally would listen to. But it may be something that then you have control as how it's delivered. And then you can also decide, you would be able to decide what the least common denominator that you're going to target would be. Because there's
that was part of my intent on writing the book. I wanted to make sure, my premise was, I wanted to show what the there's a single constant in the universe. According to science, there's a single constant in the universe everywhere, and that constant is light. Now, you take the world religions, and they know that constant is God. And I tried to show how things equal to the same thing are equal to each other, that the common denominator that holds the two disciplines together is light energy, with ample evidence from scripture and ample evidence from science that it's unmistakably light. And my purpose was not only to show that that is the common denominator. I tried to get away from as much technical stuff as I could, A, and B, to present the evidence like a prosecuting attorney in court before the jury, so that the conclusion that they draw has to be unmistakable. It's got to be light, because chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are all strung together like a string of pearls. Taken separately, they all have to do with light as their common denominator, and they do as a whole as well.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and that was my purpose. So if I ever did a series like that, it would be along those lines.
Yeah. I mean, because I do think that would be just a different way of, you said, when you're a self-publisher, that you're doing self-marketing, just a different way to do some marketing that gets some different ears. People may not have the chance to sit down and read while they're sitting in traffic, but that's the great thing. They generally can still listen to us as well. So, but because sometimes you need to do, like, I could take that book, Every Shot Counts, and take it chapter by chapter. This is what the math says, but this is what it's going to mean once you get to the golf course, or this is how it's going to manifest itself, your life, your game, whatever. So yeah, because that would be, I think that would be interesting too, because that was one of my concerns, was the level of audience that would need to be able to read and comprehend. Because there's a lot of stuff you literally have to wrap. I mean, I'm being serious. Wrap your head around. Okay, not literally.
Well, I've had people who read it say, I can't believe how you did this. It involves so many facets, yet you put it together into a single whole. But I appreciate those inputs, and I may, explore that. And I want to thank you for spending this much time with me.
Oh, no. And I hope that you'll come back again, because like I said, I think I had enough notes for 4 shows, and we've this was great. There was a lot of information. I mean, we didn't even get to the UFOs. I mean,
no, yeah. I can make a single statement about it, but maybe next time.
Let's leave that for a hook. So after we cut everyone else loose, then you can give me the details, in case there's something I need to know for the upcoming week.
That's a whole subject in itself, but the core of it has to do with electromagnetic energy that runs their technology and extrasensory consciousness that invents it.
So here's my only thing I'm going to say about UFOs here, and I am a believer, however you want to see them, but I love it when people say, well, they defy the laws of physics. And I go, no, they defy our known laws of physics.
That's right.
That's what I always think is funny. You know who can, if God wants to make sure that there's no laws of physics, you know who can do that? God could do that. I just always think that's funny, because once again.
One of the other chapters is on a modern day physicist who said that spirituality is nothing more than the physics we don't know yet.
There you go. That's
exactly what you said.
Yeah. Joe Masterleo, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for being so prepared that we were able to have this kind of exchange. I appreciate it.
No, I very much appreciate it too, because like I said, it's weird, because I say that when I go to church, I may see someone in the praise band. I'm like, oh, I wish I had that much energy to sing this song. But I do get that energy when I get to talk to people. That's the cool thing about this, is as opposed to the rest of the world, I literally get to choose who I talk to. So I will reach out. So I am very appreciative of the time that you have given me. Well, clearly
you're called to do this, and you're following, as one person said, you're following that bliss. You're following what energizes you.
Yeah, I am. So, and I appreciate, I couldn't do this, and it wouldn't be nearly as I wouldn't get as much gratification out of doing this if I didn't have people like you to talk to. So thank you very much, Joe.
Okay, thanks again.
Oh, you're welcome. Everyone, this was Joe Masterleo. He is a clinical social worker and a psychotherapist. He is also the author of The Ambient Christ, The Untold Story of God in Science, Scripture, and Spirituality. You can also find him at his website and find out more about his book, which can be found for purchase on Amazon, but you can find him at www.joeknowsgod.com. Joe Masterleo, thank you again for being on. Hey, for everyone else, you've been listening to Ro. I'm the Stone Genius. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.